Oh, you thought this was over? You thought TLF was never gonna come back? Come on, man. It's a new season. Season 4, we got new data for the range, DPS, and Mythic Plus, and it's tier list Fridays, baby. Back at it with some brand new rankings. Well, we'll get to them.
it's spicy this week, and we are looking at Mythic Plus for range DPS.
Yep.
And sure, a couple of suspects have received some suspicious nerfs, and we will be talking about those as well. But since a week has passed and everybody has been slamming the Season 4 keys, because I know you said Season 4 is not that interesting, but I see you guys playing all them keys.
Everybody's playing.
Things are very interesting this week.
Some of the data that was captured here to make this tier list was, did not include necessarily all of the changes, right? So we're looking at past week and I think a couple of days from this week as well. Not too much. So probably the I would say the transformation of the range Mythic Plus tier list is going to be an ongoing process up until, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks when we're actually going to see. Because we still have people who did not receive all of the gear, all of that level. There's a lot of things to be happening as we go further and further along. But this is the first image of what we can see in regards to like ranged in Mythic Plus.
And it's good to actually get a feel of where your spec is. And listen, man. Did you know that I actually picked up Mage, and
I saw you on the stream.
I'm terrible at it, dude. Like Arcane is so difficult, so I was actually having some issues with the rotation I was doing in a dungeon, and I couldn't figure out why I was doing like 20% less damage. Cause I know I've seen people with my eye level, man. So I just pulled up the companion app, the Warcraft logs, and just looked at my rotation. Cause you can actually go in the Warcraft logs, and if you pull up a log of your own, and you click yourself and you click casts, and then you click on either the timeline or events, whichever way you want this information to, show on your screen, on your monitor or whatever. It actually shows the abilities that you press in order of that you press them, and you can see it's like I was missing Rune of Power in some of my burst windows with the Harmony and all that Kyrian stuff. And man, like I didn't even realize, because like everything was so hectic while you pull the pack and you need interrupts and bloodlust and all that.
I mean, you cannot really like place it on time every single time, right? I mean, we know like theoretically, because we do the research on these and look at how the exact order of spells have to be casted in which time or whatever. But using the Warcraft logs app like within the game can actually help you like see exactly where you messed it up, right?
Especially if you have problems with your rotation, is like it literally shows you what buttons you press, and
you're
like, oh, I should have pressed this like 2 globals ago, and then there you go. But you know what to fix.
Did you improve after seeing?
Oh yeah, I got a couple of thousand extra DPS more, so I was like, all right, I guess that has solved it.
You can help us tremendously by just clicking the link in the description, downloading the app and using it for yourself. It helps us a million.
Oh yeah,
big
thank
win.
you very much.
Nothing
really does.
Nothing. I mean, it's a win-win, okay? It's a win. Everybody wins out of this. So once again, thank you, Warcraft Logs companion app, for sponsoring the video. And now let's see how the guys who probably use this a lot in Mythic Plus started it off with Affliction Warlock, as we do.
I do want to say something, because obviously Affliction is getting a lot of flack. Listen carefully, sit down. Affliction is not that bad, actually. I've picked it up and I've played a little bit from the insistence of the stream chat, because
that's what they do.
I would have played demo otherwise, but I did pick it up and I was really surprised at how much damage it deals, and I was kind of surprised that people don't play it at a higher key level. And obviously the main culprit is that Destro is just like infinitely better than Affliction, so that skews the performance of the spec by a large margin. Because if you have like, it's one thing to play Affliction as like, oh, I can do 23s and 24s now in Season 4, and Destro can do 25s. It's another thing that Destro can close in on 30s quickly. It's like the gap is so big that pretty much most Warlocks are like, okay, well, let's just play Destro. Why am I bothering with Affliction? So you cannot really see the full performance of Affliction. I think that's probably one of the most underrated specs right now in Mythic Plus.
Yeah. And even if we're gonna get like more data in the future weeks, you're gonna probably see a drop off in Destro, people switching to probably demo, and you're still gonna see Affliction somewhere, because there's this competition between these pure DPS specs, right? So there's nothing you can do about it. But as Flamation, Affliction is very, very capable of topping meters, no problem. Okay, so if you're Affliction main, don't be discouraged or whatever. This is just like at the top of the top, the biggest keys that have been done, but we will place it into a C tier here. I would say it's a little bit of a upwork from last week.
It's an uptrend. I mean, this is purely statistical, right? Like, no matter how we feel about the spec, no matter what potential it has, that's just how it is, how people are playing. That doesn't mean it's bad. It's just, you know, what people do with Affliction instead of, you know, pushing higher. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, Arcane Mage. We talked about this and how Flame improved on playing Arcane with Warcraft logs.
The potentially most complicated spec in the game.
Man, that's bonkers, man. I have never seen so many conditions and situations and patterns to be all clunked up and linked perfectly to be able to make that work. I guess, you know, it's performing really good, but I guess like when you have a spec like Fire to be able to choose from, or even Frost in some capacity, but I'll put Fire here.
Yeah.
Man, it's so much. Even Fire has its intricacies as well, but it's so much smoother and faster on delivering what it's supposed to deliver.
You know, I mean, this is for Mage at least. It's a very strong point to mention that with Mechagon and the bracers and all of that, it's likely that Fire was inevitably going to be better, meaning that Arcane and as a consequence Frost as well will probably be similar to Affliction, but not to that degree. A little bit lower than they should. Although Arcane is a solid B tier right now, and we will see what this B tier list means, because I think B tiers probably everybody that does 26s and higher.
In season 4,
so,
okay,
and then the season just started like a week or two ago, right? Sure, maybe the gap in power scaling isn't as high, although, you know, we get a lot of eye level from the raid and stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's looking pretty good, and you know, it's not an easy spec to play.
I think that's the main concern of it. Okay, one easier spec to play is the next one, which is Beast Mastery Hunter. Again, you can talk shit about any of the hunter specs, whatever, marksman included, but you have to be very, very like honest here. It's the same situation with warlocks. When you have survival on that on that option list, this is gonna be very far and few in between BM hunters or even marksman for that matter. But that being said, it's still doing great. I mean, we're looking at what,
I think 24s, something like that. It's probably going, depending on when you're watching this video. BM is obviously suffering from the, you know, why are you playing BM when you could be playing Survival Hunter syndrome? And since we talked about the nerfs and the nerfs not being fully implemented, not everybody has had time to, you know, play with the nerfed specs or their counterparts, their buffed specs. And Survival hasn't been hit as hard as Destro, so likely BM might not see a bigger surgeons the way that maybe Affliction would. So it's still a C tier.
I think it's in front of Affliction.
It's in front of. It's doing like 1 or 2 key levels better than Affliction, I think.
Yeah.
But it's still like at a difference between B tier and everybody else, and we will see more about that as we go forward.
We go forward to the 4th of July meal. This is the crazy turkey chicken. I love Boomkins. I love Boomkins. It's like one of my favorite specs of all time, and I'm happy to see they're performing well, and they're doing well for themselves. I can totally see them, you know, staying there for a while. But no,
you can be a great politician, man. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
you know that?
I can talk about nothing for hours. But no, on the real, we haven't seen like a big decline in Boomkin performance or whatever, like at least from last season, and even now it kind of maintained its position.
It's solid. It's consistent. I mean,
it used to be starlets all around.
Yeah, I mean, with all the buffed legendaries and the single target, which the single target still has a lot of damage. Boomkin is okay. It's a good B tier. It's actually in front of Arcane, which is a little bit weird, but hey. Because I think last season we had Arcane a tier up from Boomkin, and it could be just the initial inceptions of the tier. Could be that the layout of the dungeons favors Boomkin a little bit more. It's solid. It's not particularly designed around Mythic Plus in terms of its rotation. We all know the Astral Power conundrum and the Starfall conundrum, which hasn't been fixed, and I don't know if it's going to be fixed in Dragonflight either. But even with all of that, Boomkin is still performing really well. It does have a toolkit that favors dungeons, even though its kind of rotation isn't really designed for it. So like you have the trees, the roots, the decurse. Man, there's so many curses now.
Lots of utility.
Yeah, and utility and all of that. So that's probably one of the big leg ups that Boomkin has in this season.
Yeah, well, I gotta say, looking at the next spec we're gonna talk about here, Demonology Warlock, I think like because of like the gaps that have been made between like the highest keys push from the S tier specs and these specs that we're talking about here, that you can look at a little bit of a drop off, because initially, like on the last tier list, Demonology Warlock was an A tier, and right now it's a B tier. We're gonna probably come up a lot of B tiers here.
I do want to mention this as well, and this can
What do you want to do?
this can segue really well into destruction. So Demonology right now, it's top of the B tier. However, top of the B tier in the sense that pretty much it's done the same level of keys as everybody else in the B tier, maybe 1 or 2 levels higher, with the exception of a couple of Demonology Warlocks that are now clearing keys equal to destruction, or at least 1 level below, which kind of indicates, if we understand the nerfs for the destruction god as well, kind of indicates the fact that Demo might actually take the lead from Destro, but not enough players had time to, you know, play their Demonology instead of destruction. So it's on the rise. I expect that next time we look at it to be like way above. I don't know if it's gonna top destruction, but it's definitely going to be a stronger competitor, and right now it is what it is, where it is now, but it's probably way better than what we see today.
Yeah, this is why I mentioned like the big gap between the keys that have been made. Sure, there are a couple of demos that actually can look at the same performance as Distro, but in reality, there's a lot of Destruction Warlocks still doing like the highest keys that can possibly be done in Season 4. And this will obviously, by nobody's surprise, would put Destro Lock into
it's so
S tier.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we're talking about the gap, you know, because Demo was initially A tier. And to Flame's argument, you know, Destruction Warlock have received nerfs, although once again the data is not yet 100% in like the reporting stuff, like on Warcraft logs and Rare.io subcreation and all of that. So what we see here is just an initial form of the image, right, for the S tiers. But I do expect that something will be happening at least, well, we're going to do this probably in a month from now and look back and see exactly how things were. But make no mistake, Destruction Warlock is still wrecking it all over the place, man.
It's really good. It's kind of hard to nerf destruction into the ground, and I don't know if, I mean, it's been seeing nerfs every week from just before the Season 4 launched, so I don't know how far they're gonna keep going. It's clear that it was way overtuned, and I don't know if that can be fixed, and I don't know if it should, because it will only just break the spec. However, destruction is still reigning supreme, and
wasn't the problem with its actual tier set, not necessarily the damage from
it's
Rain of
definitely
Fire?
the tier set, because if you remember last year, destruction was in place of Affliction, and similar in Season 1. So this is part of what I don't like, how they're nerfing it, because they're nerfing its base kit, and they nerf the tier set a little bit, but they constantly are nerfing the base kit, which might cause problems once you lose the tier set, but we'll see how Dragonfly plays out. So far, destruction is still solid. I don't know if it's gonna stay S tier, but it's likely not gonna drop too much.
Yeah. Okay. Next up on the list, Elemental Shaman.
Elemental,
as always, it's retained its position. I remember some times where Elemental was in A tier, but it's like always in this middle ground. I mean, not saying that it's performing bad or whatever, it's still doing great, it deals a lot of damage, all of that. They just cannot compete with the other specs. I remember on our last year, Elemental was in C tier.
Was in C tier. Well, the one thing that we actually didn't touch upon, which you might explain why Elemental actually is now in B tier. Not only in B tier, but ahead of a lot of the specs, as opposed to what was, I think last time, the only spec that was worse performing than Elemental was Affliction. And now Elemental, I think it's doing better than Boomkin. And what I wanted to say is that what we did not talk about this season is that the loss of because helped a lot of the specs that were very cooldown reliant.
Very important.
While Elemental is a spec that's, again, very consistent, which is why we're seeing the rise of consistent DPS specs, where you don't really need that high-octane DPS burst window, where Elemental is just constantly really good, especially with the tier set and with the legendary. There's a bunch. I think last time I was looking at it, there were about 3 types of builds that Elemental could go through in dungeons in terms of Covenant and legendaries, although the talents kind of were the same. So So, and just proves that it's very consistent across the board. You're not gonna feel like you're lacking a lot as elemental. You have good damage. Obviously, Earthquake is the thing that, you know, keeps elemental into dungeons as well.
Hell
and with
yeah.
the tier set as well, with like the permanent, like super high uptime on Storm Elemental as well. That is particularly fun to play. So whether
fun,
or not
yeah.
you want to, you know, pop those stupid numbers that Destro's doing, or you just want to have fun and do enough to clear like high 25s, 26 and stuff like that, Elemental is your jam.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's in B tier, better than Boomkin, so definitely on the rise.
Yeah,
Now,
for sure.
Next up,
Hey.
big surprise, we have the Fire Mage. And Fire Mage last time was still struggling to compete with Destro. It was an A tier, but now it's an S tier.
It's an
and
S tier.
I'm looking at it and I'm thinking like since Destro will get more and more data from the nerfs, I'm thinking like Fire Mage is gonna become like the best spec.
Yeah, a
all
lot
around.
of people attributed Fire's performance last season to which obviously it affected Fire, but not as much as everybody else, because Fire, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't checked the logs in about a couple of days, the builds, but Fire's still running Kindling. And with the Sunking, also a very difficult spec to play. However, I did mention this last time we did this, that Fire is looking to probably replace Destro if Destro is ever going to fall down.
Yeah.
Since it's good. I mean, Fire has been good for like 2 years now.
I think, yeah,
And
the whole expansion.
Yeah, the nerfs that Fire received weren't that big. I think it was a season or two ago. And it's so strong. That obviously is gonna take Destro, but Destro is so much better that people just don't see Fire because it's like a little shadow. It's like all the way up in the background. But once Destro falls, Fire is probably gonna reign supreme.
and you also mentioned the Mechagon rings as well. This will
Bracer, I think,
Bracer, not rings.
Right.
Well, the rings are good too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of haste over there, but yeah, the Mechagon bracers will definitely help Fire Mage even more. I'm not sure if in the data we caught here, a lot of them actually have it. I'm pretty sure a couple had it over there.
Probably.
But yeah, one of the most important things is the fact that even though, you know, we don't have access to anymore, you can still see like Fire Mage still doing very, very, very good. And this just goes to show that, you know, all the doomsayers out there is like, oh, Fire Mage is gonna fall down once we don't have anymore. Well, surprise, surprise, they're still doing pretty great. And as Flame mentioned, you know, this is probably gonna be the superstar of the season. We'll see.
We'll see how things play out for sure.
But what about Frost Mage? A former
Frost Mage is still solid. I mean, it's doing okay. I played.
used to be S tier, man.
It used to once upon a time. However, it's just not scaling the way with the tier set that the other specs are playing, which is similar to Affliction, similar to Beast Mastery, similar to a lot of other specs. However, it's still a really good spec. It's all the way into B tier, and we will talk
Arcane,
about the B tier once we have all the specs placed out, because you can see that there's a bunch of them there. It's very similar to Boomy and Arcane. It's kind of like in between. It's nothing really changed for Frost Mage, so it's not like it's been nerfed or anything. It's just it's good.
It's the same argument we always have with this, even though Arcane and Fire are like really, really difficult to master and pull off. I mean, okay, they're two different beasts, but you know, for Arcane there's like a lot of like perfect timing or whatever. Fire Mage is a lot about that reaction and muscle memory going on and having, you know, the perfect executions for everything and reactions, mind you. There's still, I mean, Fire at least is still way more efficient and smoother on, you know, dealing that high amount of damage as opposed to like Frost, which Frost is not like, I would say, quote unquote, a slower spec or whatever. It's just when you look at the pure numbers and versus like the difficulty, right, and the mastery you need to deliver, Fire can still
I've played like 10 times more Fire than Frost, and I'm still doing better on Frost. So this is a point that I wanted to make as well. When it comes to Fire Mage, and obviously Frost Mage is now a good example, the reason why Fire Mage is so high up is because the top players can actually take advantage of how Flame Patch works and how, you know, casting back-to-back Flame Strike works, where you have to keep mobs in the same place, and if you do that, you get Destro level performance or close to Destro level performance from Fire Mage, but you cannot really do that in Pugs. And when you cannot do that, we go back to the old argument that Fire doesn't perform really well. It's very hard to do really well with Fire if the tank and the group doesn't know that they have to, you know, play around your combustion. And if that happens, then you can definitely go to Frost, where Frost is a little bit more flexible. It's a little bit more lenient. Sure, you kind of want
more bug friendly, I would say.
You still want back-to-back pulls with Frost to maintain that that Icy Veins uptime. That's ideal, and that's what, you know, pushes a lot of damage out of Frost. But it's a little bit easier to do so than, let's say, pull off Wildfire. So if you like Mage and you want to do really well, but you cannot be bothered with like pre-made groups that understand combustion, then Frost is your man.
It's
or
definitely
lady.
there. Well, at this level, anyways, you know, all the tanks kind of know, like with their compositions, they know what they had to do if they have a Frost or a Fire Mage in their group. But if you're just like average Joe, you know, it's a little bit more relaxed on Frost, let's say. Next up on the list, Marksmanship Hunter, which surprisingly is doing quite well. It's retained its position as the leader, I would say, of B tier. But again, you know,
it's another B tier spec, man.
Yeah, I know. It's gonna look very crowded in the B tier section.
So yeah, marksmanship is similar. It might sound boring at this point, but maybe this is comes from a place that can give you some comfort. It's solid, it's consistent, it has had the tools to be good in Mythic Plus the entire expansion. It didn't receive some degenerate overpowered power scaling like Destro and Fire and Survival and stuff like that. It's dude, it's degenerate. Listen,
Yeah,
it's fun to spam one button for like 5 minutes,
like
but
the cat meme.
It's a little bit more tactical, let's say. It's a little bit more difficult to pull off its rotation, and maybe it's also a little bit more rewarding. And if you don't want to play survival because you're a hunter and you don't want those bomb bonanzas, then marksmanship is probably your best bet. It's currently, let's say, above the curve, above the average, because if you look at the B tier, there's like a lot of shit in B tier. Marksmanship right now seems to be doing a little better than all of them, not by a lot, but by enough where you can justify playing marksman and maybe not survival to your group.
A couple of keys higher here and there, but you know, nothing really dramatic about it. I mean, you know, super nice single target, super good AoE, you know, wild spirits and all that. It's still like, if you want to retain the hunter fantasy with a little bit of, you know, intricacies in the mechanics, then marksman is the call. Plus it performs better than BM, so that's also an attribute you can consider. For sure.
Last
on the list,
but not
Shadow
least, actually.
Priest. Not least, yeah, this was actually the biggest surprise of the list, because Shadow was like close to the...
It was pretty low. I think it was like down to C tier-ish level. And C tier last season was different than C tier now. But it's actually holding its ground together with Demo and Elemental. And there's two reasons, I believe. One of them, the obvious, is that it received a bunch of buffs. The buffs, especially to AoE, are very welcome. I don't know, and to what I've been able to speak with Shadow Priests, they were not like out of the ordinary. They're gonna make Shadow meta, but it definitely pulls it.
You can definitely see it, like due to his performance, like the boss really helped out. I mean, I was like talking to Public, and he was like, yeah man, I'm doing dungeons right now, I'm topping the DPS, man. It's Public, we know, you know, he's like a little god of Shadow Priest.
He's an old god.
He also like mentioned it, right? Like when you said old god.
No, maybe.
I gotta know. I gotta notice that. But yeah, so as opposed to when he was doing like previous keys on or whatever, and he was struggling to be on top of the meters. Now he's like all the dungeons.
It's way better.
He's top DPS. So.
I think the argument, the second argument that we can bring to Shadow is probably similar to what we said about Elemental, is that obviously, was good for a lot of the specs and probably was good for Shadow as well. I don't see how it was amazing for Shadow last season, and since it wasn't that reliant on or at least it feels like it wasn't, that's probably why the lack of it doesn't impact it as much as it does, I don't know, maybe like Arcane Mage or Frost Mage or anything like that, where actually Shadow is doing better than them, considering that last TLF we had both the Fire Mage specs, Frost and Arcane, two tiers higher than Shadow.
Yep. And you know, and we had Shadow and Elemental into C tier as well. I mean, sure, the buffs also helped Shadow. Let's not, you know, pie around the buff. The buffs all really helped, and you can clearly see due to its performance. But now you can see the picture. We have a big crowd in the
schlong of B tier. Okay, so now while we were doing this research, we really thought about how to present this so that we can give you guys an accurate depiction of what the meta looks like. It's not that it's gonna be this way forever, but what it looks like is that a lot of the specs are solid. All the B tiers, basically the solid specs, the good specs, the what you want to play, what you want to have fun, maybe your main, right? The S tier are basically the degenerate specs, right? They're just way too good. they're so good that they're 2 tiers ahead of everybody else, and nobody's really in A tier. I would imagine that A tier is gonna be filled up later on into the season. And C tier is like the specs that, okay, they could be B tier, but they're just lacking a little bit. They were just the unfortunate recipients of a poorly designed tier set.
And they have strong competition within their class as well.
Yeah,
this is like
I would expect something like BM to be better. Usually BM scales really well with stats, and seeing as we have the Nathrazim effect, the Shrouded, where you just get stats, and that's kind of what happened in BFA as well. Apart the Azerite, there was a lot of stats, and usually BM likes that, so I would be surprised if BM didn't move up a tier in a month or two.
Yeah, this is the final image. Once again, play what you love. This is basically a ranking of like the highest of the highest keys made possible. This is how we rank them. This doesn't mean you cannot do well with your BM or Affliction. No, you'll do amazing. You know, this is just interesting to see how like the top players evolve and how all of these compositions kind of move around through the season. Okay, this is not an indicator for what you should play on the new season or whatever. All right, and that being said, first of all, thank you Patreons for supporting the content, and once again, the Warcraft Logs companion app. This is one of the best things you can have on your World of Warcraft experience. If you want to improve, check data, check people, all of that, you know, Flame improved on his Arcane Mage because of it.
It shouldn't have happened.
So definitely thank you guys for supporting and sponsoring the video. And thank you,
dear viewer, for watching the video. And
bye.
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play